Es un placer para mí poder
It's a pleasure for me to
dirigirme a
be able to
ustedes
address you
y
today
darles la bienvenida a
and
nuestro
welcome you
país,
to our
a
country,
Colombia,
to Colombia,
para conversar un poco acerca
to
de las
talk a bit about the
materia de movilidad
possibilities
urbana
of air mobility
eh,
here
acá en nuestro país y
in our
hacer alguna
country,
aproximación a ello desde
and
los
to approach it
aspectos
from the
regulatorios,
regulation
que es
aspects.
mi
That is
especialidad.
my specialty.
La movilidad aérea urbana, en buena hora,
Urban
pues
air
ya es
mobility,
una
in good
realidad.
timing, is
Eh,
already a
De
reality.
hecho, viene a resolver algunas dificultades en materia
Actually,
de
it comes
tránsito
to resolve
terrestre, de
some
tráfico
ground
terrestre que se
traffic
presentan
difficulties that are
en
present in
algunos
some
países.
countries.
El nuestro no es precisamente
Ours
la
is not
excepción.
precisely the exception.
En efecto, en ciudades como Bogotá, por ejemplo, eh, debido a que el tráfico terrestre ha crecido quizá con más velocidad
Certainly, in
con la que
cities like
creció la
Bogota, for example,
infraestructura vial,
because ground
pues
traffic has apparently
no es un
grown in a
secreto
much
que
higher rate
tenemos
than the road
dificultades en el movimiento del
infrastructure,
tráfico
it is
y
no secret
la
that we have
movilidad aérea
traffic
urbana podría
movement
ser una muy
difficulties,
buena
and urban
solución
air mobility could
para
be a very good
esta
solution
dificultad.
for this difficulty.
A esto aunamos que el transporte masivo
Adding to
tiene
this, mass transit
ciertas
has certain
limitaciones. Ahora bien,
limitations.
no es este el caso exclusivo de
Now,
Bogotá. En
this is
Colombia
not the
hay otras
exclusive
ciudades
case for Bogota.
grandes o relativamente grandes como Medellín o Cali que también tienen situaciones
In Colombia there are
similares
other big or relatively big
en las
cities
que
such as Medellin or
definitivamente
Cali, that also
la
have
movilidad
similar
aérea urbana
situations, in which
sería
urban
una
air mobility would
extraordinaria
definitely be an
solución
extraordinary
y
solution.
creemos que tendría de
We
desarrollarse,
believe
que
that,
tendría
if
una
developed,
demanda muy
it would have a
amplia
very
y
big
sobre
demand
todo
and
tendría una gran
especially it would have a
aceptación.
great
En
acceptance.
algunas ciudades latinoamericanas se ha ensayado la movilidad
In
aérea
some Latin American
utilizando
cities,
helicópteros.
air mobility has been tried using
Obviamente, el uso de
helicopters.
helicópteros implica
Obviously, the
unos
use
costos
of helicopters
considerablemente más
implies
altos.
considerably higher
En el caso de
costs.
Colombia se intentó y no fue posible llevar a cabo la
In the
movilidad
case of Colombia
urbana con
this was
helicópteros
tried,
porque
but it was
razones
not possible to carry
ambientales,
out urban mobility with
digamos, se
helicopters because
antepusieron
environmental
y no fue
reasons,
posible
let's
definitivamente.
say, interfered,
Hubo
and it
bastante
was
reacción en
definitely
contra de
not
esta
possible.
posibilidad
There were
debido
many
a
reactions against
aspectos
this
ambientales,
possibility due to
un poco
environmental
ruido,
reasons,
vibración,
mostly
este
noise,
tipo de
vibration, those
dificultades. Y
types of
adicionalmente hay
difficulties.
que admitir que el transporte pues,
And,
es bastante
additionally,
excluyente,
we have
dado
to
los
admit
altos
that
costos
air
de su operación que
transportation is very
terminan
exclusive
reflejándose
given its high
tarde
operating
o
costs
temprano
which end up
en
reflecting,
el usuario.
sooner or later,
Creeríamos
in the user.
que estas nuevas tecnologías más amigables con el medio ambiente, con unos costos de operación bastante más
We believe these new
manejables,
technologies,
le
more
abriría la
environmentally
puerta
friendly, with
y
much more
haría
manageable operating
que fuera
costs,
más
will open the
incluyente
door and make it a
este
more
modo de
inclusive mode
transporte
of
para las personas que
transportation for
realmente lo
people who really
necesitan,
need it,
no como un elemento de lujo ni como un elemento de
not as a
estatus,
luxury
sino porque
element or a
realmente lo
status
necesitan para
element, but
movilizarse
because they
a sus
really need
sitios
it
de
to get
trabajo
to
como
their
personas comunes y
workplace, as
corrientes
common
que
people
son.
that they are.
Adicionalmente, aparte de la necesidad que
Additionally,
las ciudades más
besides the
importantes de
need that most
Colombia,
important
también lo
cities of
vemos
Colombia may
como una
have,
gran
we also
oportunidad
see it as a
para
great
lugares
opportunity for
de
places with
significativo
significant
atractivo
tourism
turístico.
appeal.
Por citar solo algunos ejemplos, podría mencionarles
To name
ciudades
just a few
como
examples, I could
Cartagena o
name
Santa Marta
cities like Cartagena or
en
Santa
la costa
Marta,
caribe
on the
colombiana,
Colombian Caribbean coast,
que son
that are
ciudades de gran
cities with
atractivo
great
turístico,
tourism
con una
appeal,
belleza extraordinaria, tanto en lo
with
natural
extraordinary
como en su
beauty, both in
arquitectura,
its nature
y
and
que
in
bien
its
vale la pena
architecture,
que sean
and are well
observadas
worth
desde
seeing
afuera.
from the
De hecho,
outside.
acá sí ha habido algo de trabajo con helicópteros,
In fact, there has been some
obviamente
work with
a costos
helicopters,
relativamente elevados,
obviously
pero
at
sí ha habido
relatively
algo de
elevated
trabajo
costs, but there
de
has been some work of
observación
sightseeing
turística desde
tourism
helicópteros.
from
Es una gran
helicopters.
oportunidad, definitivamente. Son ciudades
It's
con un
definitely a
atractivo
great
singular.
opportunity.
O también
They're
podríamos
cities with a
mencionar,
singular
insisto, solo estamos
attractiveness.
hablando de
Or we
algunos
could
ejemplos,
also
serían
mention,
muchos.
I
Podríamos
insist,
hablar en la
we're only
Amazonía
talking
colombiana, en
about
la
a
zona
few
de la Amazonía,
examples, there would be many.
el
We could talk
Parque
about the Colombian
Natural
Amazonia,
de
the
Chiribiquete,
Amazonian zone, the
que
Chiribiquete
actualmente
Natural
inclusive
Park.
desarrolla
That,
este
actually,
tipo de actividades
currently
desde
carries out this type of activity with
aviones de
conventional
ala fija
fixed-wing aircraft.
convencionales. Entonces sería bien interesante y como les digo, solamente estamos
So,
mencionando
it would be very interesting,
dos,
and as I'm saying,
tres
we're only
puntos
mentioning
específicos en
3
cuanto a la
specific
atracción
points
turística
regarding the
que
tourist
pudiera haber.
activities there
De
could
verdad es una
be.
gran oportunidad y vemos que hay ahí
It's truly a great opportunity, and we see there is a great possibility there.
Ya desde el punto de vista regulatorio, y que desde luego el escenario para
Now, from the regulation point of view, indeed, the scenario for this development implies having a regulations environment that allows it to take place.
Colombia cuenta con una robusta regulación aeronáutica.
Colombia has a robust aeronautic regulation, developed from international standards promoted by the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO. This regulation, that is obviously under constant change, under constant update, would allow us, with some adaptations, to do it.
Nos permite concluir que efectivamente
the analysis we have made led us to conclude that the actual regulation with some adaptations would allow us to develop urban air transport in Colombia. Now, which aspects would maybe imply adjustments, or which aspects must be considered in a regulation oriented to facilitate this new activity? Foremost, it would be necessary to think about aircraft certification. There is no doubt that under the light of the definitions developed by ICAO, under the concept of what an aircraft is, and legislations, including that of Colombia, regarding what an aircraft is, we are in the presence of aircraft. That should not scare us. We should not think we'll confront difficulties, on the contrary, that we have an open and experienced field.
Será necesario entonces establecer
all that being said, it will be necessary to establish norms for the certification of these aircraft, to establish airworthiness requisites because the actual ones do not adapt to these vehicles specifically. But some small adaptations would have to be made, with the purpose of regulating aspects like, for example, structural characteristics or flight characteristics, that enable protecting the occupants of these devices, that allow having a safe flight. Norms that assure good aircraft maintenance, in pursuit, precisely, of users' safety. By all means, norms that allow them to be adequately operated, to be operated within their limitations. All aircraft have operational limitations, and it is important they operate within their operational limitations, with the purpose of guaranteeing safety. Probably, small adaptations would have to be made to the norms concerning registration. Ownership would have to be registered, surely assign them a license. A very important element, if the flight equipment are to be manned, and we believe that at least in the beginning this would be the case. Eventually, it would also be necessary to establish minimum standards, minimum conditions of suitability for the people in charge of the operation of these devices. Eventually a license or something similar, just like it's starting to happen for drones operation. ICAO is already proposing the implementation of licenses for drones operation, especially those more operationally exposed. So, it is not dismissible that there would be something similar, and that it would be necessary to regulate something similar. And anyway, at least some minimum conditions of suitability, of knowledge, and aptness in these people to guarantee that whoever uses the service, do so in safe conditions. Undoubtedly, it would be necessary to think about air transit rules, how they would circulate. Rules that would be slightly different from the existing ones for conventional aircraft. Air transit procedures different to the ones existing for conventional aircraft. But that allow to coexist and share airspace with conventional aircraft, without generating interference. This would be an extremely important element, and probably one of the most important. To define how air transit would be carried out, and this would facilitate operation, avoiding interference with conventional aircraft traffic.
También sería necesario definir algunas normas o criterios de carácter ambiental.
It would also be necessary to define environmental norms or criteria. We've said it, these devices are viewed from now as much friendlier devices with the environment than the conventional aircraft that we know. But precisely it would be necessary to define some parameters to assure it to be so.
También sería necesario definir algunas disposiciones en materia de infraestructura.
It would also be necessary to define some directions in terms of infrastructure. What would be the necessary infrastructure? What characteristics must this infrastructure have? Norms-oriented, for example, to assure they will not be affected by the presence of obstacles in their proximities. That they're not affected by the presence of, for example, energy cables, tall buildings, towers, antennas. Certain characteristics that allow the arrival and departure of these devices from platforms, elevated or at ground level maybe, but that allow arrivals and departures, and surely ingress of people so they can access the service. So there would have to be some sort of addition in that regard. And finally, but not less important, the adaptation and integration. And there would have to be dispositions that do so, adaptation and integration of the urban air transport service with ground public transport services or public surface transport services. It would be necessary, then, for them to integrate, to adapt, because, usually, modes of transportation do not function on their own. Transport modes imply, normally, that there's certain transfer from one mode to another, that one can pass from one type of vehicle to another. Consequently, it would be necessary to have some dispositions that foster this type of integration. This, indeed, may not be under the umbrella of the aeronautics authorities but rather under local authorities, and, naturally, it would be necessary to make some coordination, which, at least in Colombia, we would see feasible. And we would think that in any country, the situation would not be different. Let's say that, in general, this is the vision we have concerning regulation for the development of this urban air mobility in Colombia. And given the opportunity that is being presented, considering that for Colombia it is a true necessity, for Colombia urban air mobility, as I said at the beginning, is a necessity, it will not be a luxury. It will be a necessity, and will also be an opportunity in the tourism aspect we have mentioned. With this, I would like to reiterate my welcoming and the wishes for success during this event. Thank you very much.